dig into your lifestyles and market, and to check what kinds of new businesses and restaurants that you would be supportable in Winchester. And we've done a lot of that, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but we have data that tells us everything about what you do. And two of you had the chicken steak last night at Bob Evans, and you had double helpings of it, so I'm trying to see who that was here. Just kidding.
And we also, we are live now, so we're gonna roll in a minute, but we also have our architect and urban designer over here, Mike Campbell. Mike, you wanna say hi? You've been working away all week.
Hi, you already introduced me. I'm an architect and urban designer, and I'm involved in this project. I don't know what else.
All right, thanks, Mike. We're actually gonna show some of Mike's renderings tonight and talk about how the new urbanism and mixed use might be a good fit for some areas.
Yeah, so our
Test? Yeah, so my question is, I'm thinking to myself, what could we be doing to attract this sort of development that you're speaking of? And based on your presentation, what I'm gathering is rent's a little high, walkability could be higher.
Yes and no. The walkability, I think your walk score is wrong. A lot of times the walk score is done, it's actually done by Now about 160,000 square.
Old Town is the front door to the community, it's the place. And we talked about the need for housing, the need for diversity, the need for new places, and that is all centered around the anchors of those places. So as we think about mixed use and where new mixed use might go, the Waterloo District, potentially some other districts around town, this scale of village, town, city, that's what we're going to be working on tuning over the next little bit. You know, we asked the community on Monday night about what their core values were, and we heard a lot of support, and we also learned from the community about the types of things that they associated with each of these core values. And I'm just kind of showing these word clouds and the rankings because we didn't actually report this back in this way. But this is what the community told us, and we're going to do an exercise like this very shortly to ask you about the results as well. So, for instance, in transportation, the community wanted safety. In thinking about public services, the community wanted reliability, quality. And thinking about equity, inclusion, and cohesion, the community wanted acceptance, respect, diversity. And thinking about natural resources and sustainability, we wanted to protect green spaces, have renewable energy and trees. And thinking about our cultural resources, we wanted variety, respectfulness, more arts. And thinking about the community's character, we wanted to preserve the history, preserve the small town feel, and joining the old with the new. And thinking about housing in neighborhoods, we wanted affordability, we wanted to slow the growth, and keep quiet in the neighborhoods downtown. So we worked with the community to translate these into value statements, and we presented these value statements last night. We're going to ask you to help us test this, but what we did is we synthesized 8 value statements that will be formalized as the base of this plan. We value community, economic, and environmental resilience that fosters well-being. We've turned that into a goal statement to develop policies that encourage economic activities and preserve the environment and wellness. And we've also grouped much of the feedback that we've heard through the variety of exercise into what I would call kind of candidate recommendations or strategies. I'm not going to read everything on the list, but creating more entertainment options, creating more retail options, creating a more variety and upscale food services and dining options. All of this relates to the market that Bob was presenting and the opportunities that the community has to grow in the way that it wants. These values are supported. The community values the livability of our built environment made possible by design, aesthetics, green spaces, and connectivity. And thinking about a goal statement related to that value, establishing key transportation and land use strategies that increase connectivity and provide for policies to maintain green space and continue to refine design standards. So some strategies that we've heard from the community that relate to that value. Creating more bike paths, connecting to the metro parks, creating sidewalks by Meyer, connecting Old Town to McGill Park. Again, I'm not going to read everything, but these are the values that came from participants. These are the things that participants in this process want to see reflected in the community plan. We value inclusion, partnership, and collaboration through volunteerism and strong community relationships. Related to a goal, to continue to improve opportunities for the celebration of all cultures and to allow new traditions to be formed. Some of the strategies we've heard from residents related to that, being welcoming and inclusive, having leaders that listen to residents, joining the old with the new, valuing diversity in the community schools, engaging younger residents, awareness, and discouraging NIMBYism. If people online and here don't know that, that means not in my backyard. It's basically having policies that are reflective of what people want so that people can actually support that development when it comes. We value an established social infrastructure that is supportive through all life phases, enabled by community events, pride in place, and public places. A goal related to that, to build new public gathering spaces and enhance existing places where individuals naturally come together. Some strategies we've heard from residents that relate to that idea: having an active historical society, supporting neighborhood organizations, having cultural clubs in schools, development of historical complexes, new recreation centers. These are strategies that the citizens have said they want to see reflected in this plan, and they relate to the values that the community has developed. We value a community character established by a small town feel, facilitated by good corporate citizenship, succession planning, building context, and scale. A goal related to that, establishing a framework of scale and building context throughout the entire community, and creating policies that encourage multi-generational involvement. Strategies we heard related to this goal: having consistent design standards, policies that promote multi-generational involvement, developing of cultural and recreational complex facilities, keeping that small town feel, and valuing historical homes. We value linkages to Columbus and southeastern Ohio, positioning the community as a regional destination between Ohio and southeastern U.S. Translated to a goal related to that value, continuing to foster the unique character of the community and developing strong gateways to the city. Strategies related to that, having prominent gateway signages at the end of the community, preserving history, reducing congestion, providing public transit routes, and the safety of 33. We value housing diversity that retains quality and offers options for those at all stages of life. A goal related to that, creating land use policies that encourage diverse, quality housing options. Example strategies: providing retirement housing, young professional housing, so housing for the young and the old, mixed use opportunities for different types of housing, neighborhood identity, well-maintained neighborhoods, and the character of historical housing stock. We value high-quality public services and infrastructure that are fiscally responsible. A goal related to that, strategically planning to maintain and enhance services, utilities, and amenities. Strategies related to that, reliable service and utilities, having the community's own police force, having city-owned utilities. Currently, the city does own its utilities. Considering the cost of maintenance, recruiting staff, and awareness of future changes, and controlling growth through access to utilities. So these community values and relating those values to actionable objectives and collecting strategies that really come directly from the people who are involved in this process. This was one of our main challenges and charges this week. And that's why I kind of say this is a 30% plan, right? Because what we have here is the basis of a strategic action plan that can be implemented and built upon by this community throughout the planning process. So we've also worked in the last 2 days to develop a vision for the future land use plan. And as I mentioned, the way that has been developed is kind of posted on the back of the room. It came directly from residents. Everyone looked at, did their own, what we call the mental map or personal geography, sharing how they related to the community from a spatial point of view, and what landmarks in this community or assets they most relate with. What are the barriers that they wanted to see addressed? Then, many of the same participants, some new participants, actually did the same thing with a land use map. They drew on the land use map what the big issues that they wanted to see addressed in a future land use plan. And we've worked today to synthesize those two activities that came from residents into a draft future land use plan. And I'm actually going to ask my colleague, Adam, to talk through that process, share a little bit of the base information that went into it, and share with everyone tonight that future land use vision. Draft future land use vision.
Draft future land use vision. Thank you, Paul. And I think, Paul, you did a good job giving an overview of what we've done over the last 2.5 days, kind of to get to a point where we have a preliminary or a draft future land use map. I just want to give you a little sort of preview of some of the base level research that we've been doing, kind of leading up to the charrette, and also, you know, some of the resources that we used. So we didn't go into it blind. We had a whole pile of maps, both maps that we developed in-house as part of our background research to try and depict things that really hadn't been depicted before. And if you kind of turn around to about 4 o'clock behind you, you'll see that big round table there. And that round table is just full of all of the different plans from your neighboring jurisdictions, from MORPC, from ODOT, from all of the other groups that have done planning in Central Ohio that have impacts on Canal Winchester. And we took all of the resources and data and maps out of there as well. And we tried to synthesize some of that information to make the picture clearer about, you know, where can Canal Winchester reasonably grow through an annexation strategy, right? We've all talked about annexation a lot. All of the communities around the region are doing it, or property owners are attaching to communities that their properties touch. Even if the border's just a little bit contiguous, they have the option of doing that. And so that involves Columbus, that involves Pickerington, and that involves Groveport. So you can kind of see, this is one exhibit we did to kind of visualize where those border parcels are on Canal Winchester's border. We synthesized that with utilities data that was provided to us by the city in terms of what the capacity of your water system, your sewer system, your sanitary system is in terms of just how far could the boundary grow in terms of what that system can accommodate. And there we go. We also looked at other factors such as, you know, what is a up-to-date inventory of existing land uses? How are land uses distributed in the city today? And of course, it's a high growth area, so it's a rapidly changing picture. We tried to make it as up to the minute as possible. Those are just two examples. We have a whole stack of other exhibits, and those are all going to eventually be exhibits that go in the final community plan. You know, we really want the community plan to be something that is really visual, really easy to understand. There's so many similar plans that have been done over the years that are just, you know, but done by consultants that got paid by the word and not by the content. We want to do things, we want to tell the story visually so that it's easy for anyone and accessible for anyone, not just the technicians, to pick up this plan and really understand what's in it. I think also, going back, Paul, to the draft core value statements, again, it's kind of the fact that we have 8 of them, that they're very kind of clear and concise, and again, we're going to keep refining those. But it's that type of thing where we can all kind of embrace kind of, you know, very easy to understand story about what we are and where we want to be as a community. So when we did these exercises, we started with you know, a really kind of pared down menu of land use categories. We talk about land use categories. We're not, in this instance, just talking about use. We're also talking about form, and we're talking about function. So you can see up here on this exhibit, you've got the name of a district or of a category, you've got its form, and you've got how it functions. And when we talk about form and function, Bob did a really good job of introducing that. And actually, I want to give you all a pop quiz now, see how well you were paying attention to Bob. What are the 4 principal forms that Bob mentioned when he gave you all of those great visual examples in his presentation? There are 4. Can anyone name one of them? Hamlet. Town. City. Village. Oh my gosh. 100% Bob. 100%.
Has to be the instructor.
Exactly. So you're all going to take Bob's Harvard class now, because you'll all get an A at Harvard at this rate. So we start with the hamlet. The next one up is the village. The next one up from that is the town. And then the next one up from that is the city, right? And we think Canal Winchester really falls into that sort of town. And when we're talking about Canal Winchester, there's a lot of areas of this community, right? There are older areas, old town, historic areas, and newer areas. We're talking about Old Town when we walk down Waterloo Street or we walk down High Street. okay, that's where we're talking about that town environment where our built form in Old Town is very, very similar to what we saw with Nantucket, what we saw with some of those other great examples. But hamlet, village, town, city. So we kind of were going through that framework, right? When we're looking at form, we have things on this slide in this middle column. You can see kind of a suburban form. You know, what does a rural form look like? Old Town, we use that word. General Town, that would be that form. Mixed use, we say city center. So now that's a form that's a little bit more intense than what we have in Old Town. It's not going to be as intense as what you see in downtown Columbus, for example, but it's maybe a step up from that town atmosphere. And then, of course, there are things like regional, commercial, and industrial. Those are kind of special districts, single-use districts that are almost campus-like in their form. And I think campus, you know, is a really good way to liken that. We think of going down to Columbus and visiting the Ohio State campus, for example, right? That's kind of its own district. And there are a lot of different things that go on that. That's a university campus. It serves a special purpose. But there's also the opportunity to really integrate some walkability, integrate some memorable architecture, integrate some public places. We can do the same thing when we think about districts like even an industrial district or a regional commercial district. And so here we're going to just see some of the work product here. So if you were to look behind you, you can see all of those individual land use maps back there on the wall that everybody participated in. We kind of took those and we really worked in groups to try and get them down to 3, to try and combine some of those categories. Some people didn't feel comfortable coloring on the maps, so they wrote their ideas. That was absolutely 100% okay too. We tried to really get the spirit of those written comments just as we did the colors that people put on the maps. And we really tried to integrate them and what we like to say or call synthesize them, you know, into 3 maps, and then we took the 3 maps and we synthesized them into a draft map. So here's one of those, and you can see in the blue color we have school, the gray color, industry, using terms like multifamily, using terms like natural, right? So our parkland, our open space. See yellow for neighborhood. And we have some pinks on there too. So old/new town in this one, and mixed center. Those are our mixed use categories that are maybe really tracking a little bit more with that intensity, that step up from hamlet, village, town, city. Here's another one where instead of doing a color key, we wrote the labels on there. And again, you can see a lot of similarities. We tried to use consistency in the colors that we did so that we can really quickly look from one to the next. We can see where there are big similarities and big differences. So again, as we go further south in the incorporated boundaries, we can see residential, just like we can, you know, on the last one, they just use a little bit different color there. We can see along 33, the big thick black line, that's where we get a little bit more of the red and the gray, which are more of the specialized districts focusing on those commercial uses. And by commercial, we don't just mean retail, we don't just mean big box stores. We're also talking about offices, we're talking about medical offices, we're talking about other kind of specialized commercial uses as well that can all be integrated in to that area. And here's one more depiction of it as well. And that one's a little bit more abstract, but I think after having seen the first 2, we can kind of get the same sense. We see a lot of purple. Purple is more of a mixed use category, but again, that mixed use category can be really low intensity, like hamlet level intensity, where we still have a lot of open space, we still have a rural feel, and yet we're allowing for growth to occur from, you know, residential perspective, even from a very small scale commercial perspective. It's all about how the design and the spacing and the character is regulated. Let's put those 3 together. We worked really, this is one of the reasons we kept you waiting a little bit longer, because we wanted to make sure we got this absolutely right before we put it up on the screen. Of course, I'm going to go the wrong direction for the big reveal. And again, this is a preliminary map, so there's more work to do. There's more opportunity to discuss this, to refine this, to put input on it. But I do want to walk you through some of these categories here. So, And our big mess on the table, I thought I had a laser pointer. Oh, I do. Aaron saves the day yet again. I want to walk you through these because I know the screen is a little bit tricky, especially when we look at colors. So let's look at kind of an easy one, parks open space, the really light green. I think that's a self-explanatory category. Let's go a little bit darker. We say rural preserve hamlet, and you can see a lot of these areas further on the south edge of Canal would be considered rural preserve or hamlet. We get a little bit lighter into the yellow. That's single-family residential. Most of the existing residential neighborhoods that are built out, that are stable, are generally single-family residential, and we would expect those to stay that way for the foreseeable future. We get into the orange. We see multifamily residential. There are some very limited segments of multifamily residential that exist in Canal as of today. Some of the condos technically are multifamily just because they're site condos that are attached. They would technically qualify. And then we have a few projects going in as we speak, kind of north on Diley Road. That's not projected to be a much bigger category than what we see on the map. Now we get into kind of the more interesting ones, these mixed use categories, these purple categories. We've got the neighborhood, we've got what we call Old Town Center, and we've got New Town Center. And I think after hearing Bob's discussion, I would want to almost relabel these if I could, and we've got Hamlet, but this light pink here would be more like Village. And this T4, Old Town Center, this would be more like Town. And then this one, which I know on the screen looks just about the same color of purple, but it's a little bit darker, T5 would almost be like City. But again, we're using a qualifier on there. When we say city, there's a whole other range that we can get into when we're talking about cities. But for right now, let's just think of that as more intense than Old Town in terms of maybe the mix of uses, maybe the kind of buildings, maybe the height of some of the buildings. Lastly, we held over the red, which is, again, kind of a campus-based approach to commercial and office, and the gray, which is kind of a campus-based approach to some of these industrial and logistics uses. And then just because we have so much of our land given over to great schools, we wanted to make sure we highlighted that, and so that's where the blue is. So if we break it down, we can kind of see Old Town here, the historic center of Canal Winchester. What we heard a lot was we want to kind of see Old Town stretch a little bit. We want to see it stretch a little bit along West Waterloo. We want that area to be a little bit more walkable than it is. Right now, people generally go as far as the railroad underpass, and beyond that, they want to get in their car and drive. These boundaries otherwise are roughly the same as what you would expect to find in the Old Town plan. And you can really tell when you get to Old Town. You don't need a little sign that says welcome to Old Town. I mean, it's very obvious from the context. When we kind of get out to the fringes, again, we've got a lot of the yellow, which is the traditional kind of single-family neighborhoods that have been built out over the last several decades that are functioning very well. But then we have a couple of these areas. So, for example, north of the railroad tracks right along High Street, that's almost like a mixed-use kind of village context as it is. There are, a couple different housing types already existing in that area. There are a couple of buildings that were built to be mixed-use buildings and could once again be mixed-use buildings. We have a post office up there. And so this is an area that really is kind of functioning. It's more intense than Hamlet. It's less intense than the town. So we've kind of assigned it that T3 neighborhood or really kind of village mixed-use context. There are a couple of other areas that it looks like sort of consensus was around exploring some of that lower intensity mixed use. So for example, here on the very far west side of this is Rager Road here, so on the east side of Rager Road, right around this area where we have sort of a floodplain, creating sort of a boundary would be an appropriate area if we were to think about how would we want to grow in the future. And like Bob said, growth is coming. It's inevitable. I think the question we want to ask is, do we want to have control? Do we want to have the say over how we grow and what we grow into? Or do we want Columbus to have that say? Do we want one of the other neighboring communities to have that say? Do we have any other of the T3 neighborhood? I think those are the two areas that we kind of looked at for T3 neighborhood. We talked about T4. The rest of the purple here is, again, I know it's a little bit difficult the way these screens work, but this would be the T5, kind of new town center. The T5 new town center category, again, it's something where it could either be, you know, at maybe the same scale, especially when we're looking here in Waterloo. Waterloo really has that character that's maybe a little bit less intense. And as a matter of fact, yeah, I want to say Waterloo is definitely more of a village character than a town character. And so this was really an interesting discussion that we had, kind of synthesizing these maps about, you know, it's got so much potential. Do we want it to go, you know, on a more intense scale? Do we want to maybe make it equally intense as Old Town Canal Winchester, or do we want to maybe make it less intense? I think this is something that we're going to be talking about and looking at. But for a first pass, it was really interesting to see consensus that people see that as a highly area with high potential for some new uses, a mix of uses, and a little bit of development. And same when we go to the north and we cross 33 up here behind the Diley Ridge Medical Center. That medical center here we're showing in the red because again, it's kind of a campus. In this case, it's a medical office campus. But those have really become great anchors for a lot of different types of uses, housing and commercial uses, especially senior housing. You know, housing for seniors that can live independently, but want to be close within walking distance to all of their medical needs. We think there's some potential for that right behind the Diley Ridge site. And then, of course, surrounding that is the Canal Point Industrial Park and where it's projected to grow just based on the existing infrastructure and the utilities. I want to see if I have any other highlights here. I think I want to highlight some of these green areas. You know, on the south side as we kind of get towards Lithopolis. Again, we're talking rural preserve hamlet. This was an area where everybody, I think, that filled out a map was comfortable with new residential development kind of filling in down there. But we really wanted to make a distinction that it might not look like the more conventional residential development that we see, you know, kind of ringing Old Town. It might actually look a number of different ways. It might look a little bit more compact in the sense that it's, you know, clustered a little bit like that hamlet that Bob showed, where you've got a variety of house types with some quality architecture, you know, clustered around maybe a square or maybe a green. And maybe there's even room for, you know, a really small store or a country market that can capture some of the traffic going between Canal Winchester and Lithopolis. The possibilities are really endless. But what it does mean is that I think people are open to seeing new residents moving into these areas as the community grows, and that maybe it could look a variety of ways, not just more of the conventional subdivisions. Mike, yes.
Oh, I just think it'd be worth pointing out that when in developing those hamlets, there would be open space set aside. In the development of hamlets, as Adam was describing, there would be open space set aside, so it wouldn't be like the whole thing was a hamlet.
That's, you know, might be good to just break these comments.
I think that's good. I think it's a good point. Do we have any comments? Do we have any?
We are actually going to go into the Mentimeter too.
That's right, we are going to do Mentimeter. I don't see any hands going up, so I see a hand up.
Adam, I didn't hear you say much about ongoing agriculture, and I know I was in the exercise this morning, and was there any comments about agriculture and where that is perceived to still be viable?
I think we,
The rural preserve area.
yeah, I think we had some.
That area we were just discussing.
Yeah, I think with the rural preserve area, you know, it's really kind of a flexible category for starters. You know, it's an area that can be developed as residential as the demand exists for it. But, you know, that residential can coexist if, you know, you still have a neighboring parcel that wants to continue in agricultural production. You know, they can do it, and they can be very compatible together.
Does rural preserve also include like conservation areas, or that fit in that T category as well?
We also have the open space on the map, so it's a little hard to see.
Yeah, we have the parks open space, right? And I know this is a little tricky to see, right? So these would be conservation areas. I mean, so what you're seeing here might be McGill Park. And again, upon closer study, if people are generally happy with this, we're gonna zoom in. We're gonna take a look at these areas even closer, because you're right, there may absolutely, based on floodplains, based on watersheds, based on other environmental considerations, there may be other areas, in here where we can get a little bit more detailed and talk about conservation, so, yeah.
Let's launch the Mentimeter. Let's go over that, because we're gonna ask some questions about this, right?
I can get it.
Yeah.
So, does anyone else have any questions? So we're gonna actually, launch, the Mentimeter. We're gonna ask you some questions about the community values. And also, we're gonna ask some land use questions. So we wanna know if you're supportive of, mixed use ideas, if you're supportive of, the industrial campuses. And we've got some questions that we're gonna ask based on those. And Jane's launching that right now. So if you remember to do this exercise, you're gonna need to use your cell phone. Who participated in this activity when we did it on Tuesday? All right, we got some veterans here, people who have well experience. So what we're gonna do is, as Jane launches this, you're gonna go to a website and then there's a code that we're gonna give you. And when you put that code, we're gonna ask you a series of questions. And we've got it pulled up.
Yep.
Oh, we gotta move over to the same screen, right? Rather than presentation mode. I will do that while you talk.
So if you remember, go to menti.com or Google Mentimeter.
Let's spell that.
MENTI. It's up here on the screen now. And then use the code 61967262.
Can we remind everyone that's watching, they can do the same thing?
Yeah, and if you're online and streaming at home, you can log on and give us feedback as well. So please join us in this.
Search for mentimeter.com. Can we say it one more time?
Yeah, it's Menti, MENTI.com, and the code is 61967262. I see a lot of you have already gotten there. So we've already been through this once for most of you, so you know how to work the scale, and these are the value statements we went over earlier. I know we have a couple more trying to log on, so we'll give it another minute.
All right. Everyone's getting this going? All right.
Alrighty, so now that we're all in, we'll go through these rather quickly. So this is the We Value Community, Economic, and Environmental Resilience that fosters well-being. Scored it a 4.6, 4.7.
All right.
All right, so how do we feel about the valuing the livability of the built environment, which is made possible by the design, aesthetics, green spaces, and connectivity? Love to see the high support here. I'm looking around the audience, it looks like everyone's pretty much gotten it, so 4.8 there. And then this one, inclusion, partnership, and collaboration through volunteerism and strong community relationships. All right, people coming, 4.3 so far, down to 3.9. Back up to a 4. Okay, 4.1.
Jane, that's on a scale of 1 to 5.
1 to 5. Okay, looks like we probably leveled that at a 4.1. All right, how do we feel about the established social infrastructure that is supportive through all life phases and enabled by community events, pride in place, and public spaces. .6 looks pretty steady. 4.5. Not seeing much movement, so we'll leave this at a 4.5. And how do we feel about the community character, which is established by the small town feel and facilitated by good corporate citizenship, succession planning, and building context? Keep them coming. Looks like we're probably level about at 4.5. Everyone's heads are up, so that's a good sign. The linkages to Columbus and southeastern Ohio, positioning the community as a regional destination between Ohio and the southeastern United States. Feeling maybe a little less enthusiastic, 3.8. This comes with the congestion, and you know, understand it's a little bit of a, maybe there's value to it, qualified stuff. All right, I think we've leveled out at a 3.8. And then how do we feel about the housing diversity that retains quality of life and offers options for those at all stages of life? Quite a bit of movement on that one. All right, looks like we probably scored this one a 4. This last one. The high quality public services and infrastructure that are fiscally responsible. .6. Okay, looks like everyone's heads up. We can probably say we're at a 4.6 for this. So we do have a couple of statements about the land use maps that we just went over. We're going to break them the same way. Try to keep it easy. So what's your level of support for creating the new mixed-use districts with diverse housing types, retail, employment, and services? This is on a scale of 1 to 10. So you get a little bit more variation here, a little bit more granular ability to rate here. All right. 8.4, 8.5. We'll move on. What's your level of support for enhancing campus manufacturing and industrial uses located close to US 33? Oh, this is the issue we've had a lot of conversation about. Again, that's a scale of 1 to 10, so 5.8 looks like we've leveled out on that. Move on. What is your level of support for preserving open space around Walnut Creek? The green space we've been talking about. Kind of a particular strategy around that. All right, looks like I keep seeing a lot of eyes, so it's gonna move on. 8.6 for that. And then what's your level of support for creating workforce housing and mixed-use developments close to US 33? Got a lot of movement on this one. A lot of different opinions. All right. I think we probably got most of it in, 5.4. So kind of right in the middle. And then what's your level of support for preserving agricultural character? So we just had a question kind of about this. So what does everyone think? All right, that's 6. Got a few more coming in. Okay. I believe this is the last one. So what is your level of support for creating high-end housing using strategies that preserve open space and encourage mixed-use development? Pretty high level of support so far for this one, 8.1. Looks like we've got 13, we've had 13 or 14 on all of these, so I think we can move on that, and that's the last question, so I will hand it back to Tom. We can do one live, yeah.
We're gonna try to add one. Bob suggested we add one, so if everyone hangs on it a second. We wanna ask, Bob presented about the scale of mixed-use development, and those four types, the hamlets, village, town, and city. So what I'd like to maybe ask is, what's your level of support for new hamlets? We might have to get you a new code. We're gonna do this one on the fly.
It will be the same code, I just have to restart the
Oh, I see,
presentation.
okay. So we'll ask, what is your level of support for developing new hamlets? And then let's do each type. So we'll do one for that.
Can we we'll do it like this.
Yeah, we can do that, yes. Perfect. Hamlets, villages, or villages, town, or city. And remember, that is not city like downtown Columbus. It's city which would be just a little bit more intense than town character that we have in Old Town. So slightly bigger or, slightly taller buildings. Old Town Plus.
It'd be 3 to 5 story.
3 to 5 story buildings, great.
If you just hit refresh on your browser, it'll pull up this last question.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So
Or there was a place to go to new slide, it said, so you could do that too.
Is there like a specified, is this just in general, not like a specified geographic area for each of these?
yeah, so as Adam presented a preliminary future land use map, and that would be kind of our first draft. The areas on that map that were defined more in the purple mixed use character are the areas we think might be appropriate for developing at one of these levels. And I think some of them really are more appropriate for the hamlet or village context. And then the Old Town context is what we would think is replicating that town. So then when we ask about cities, it's, would you like to see any, 3-story, 4-story areas, so slightly taller than Old Town? Have we leveled it on this?
Still, I think people are still refreshing where we've got 8, so. I think we're probably leveled up.
Great, when we see a lot of support for expanding that Old Town character to some new areas. And I think the village and, some level of support for hamlets and cities and villages too. So this is actually the question that we hope to explore in a little more detail in November. So we are planning our next follow-up workshop on November 9 and 10. And we hope many people that have participated will join us and more people, because we'd like to explore in more detail that level of development for some of the new areas. And I do want to just do a little preview here of where we're going to start for our next workshop. So, thinking about the areas on the edge, on Waterloo, on the edge of the Gender Road District. These are preliminary renderings. We're not going to ask you for feedback about this tonight. We're going to start in November by evaluating and creating new designs around some places. But this is, I'd say, a town level mixed use schema. What's that?
Why it's upside down.
Oh, I made this upside down because I wanted north to go up, and it was designed with north down. So you're going to see this oriented, so 33 is on the north. This is just south of 33. There's going to be 2 like this, where I asked them to be turned around so that north faced up. This is, in Waterloo, we talked about developing that town character east of Old Town in Waterloo, and you'll see that the town is supported by residential structures around what that central place would be. This could also be a hamlet scale, by the way, or a village scale, really. I think actually that I might describe this as a village type drawing. Even as you leave Brewdog tonight, right? So thinking about mixed use on this area, there's such potential in this area. So this is showing kind of hotel and housing complex with some new retail buildings fronted on Gender Road. Thinking about Diley around Meyer, you know, we know there actually is a number of industrial sites planned kind of right next to 33, and I think some of that's actually not in Canal, but it's served by Canal's utilities. But, you know, thinking about how to use maker spaces and, you know, small manufacturing, small business as a way of entering access into this area, but then around Meyer, developing that town center feel. And then, of course, across by the hospital area and the industrial, Canal Point Industrial Park, thinking about, you know, potentially senior housing or new housing that works in with the hotel's campus. This is another one that I had flipped around so that north was up. As you see, 33, this is on the north side of 33. And we actually reversed it, so we wanted to do your impressions before we showed those. Yeah, so as we adjourn tonight, we'd love to talk more with you. I know we went a little long, but thank you for your patience. Thank you for sharing your feedback with us, and let's continue the conversation. Although, what time is it? 9:05, so we're 5 over. I like to be pretty close to time. I think, is anyone up to, does anybody want to ask questions, or is anyone up to stay longer for questions? Well, before we end the broadcast. All right, well, we've had a very thorough conversation, appreciate it. We'll sign off too, so thank you for watching at home.